Welcome back, listeners, to the second half of our episode featuring the legendary Colin Bond. In keeping with Colin's lengthy career, there was simply too much material to cram into one session, and it's we who are the beneficiaries of Colin's longevity in the sport. We hope you enjoy part 2, and now on with the show. Well, everybody, welcome to part 2 of the Colin Bond podcast. We have had some very, very interesting information passed across the table today in part 1. I think we'll start with part 2 around about the time that you had your fair share of run-ins with Alan Grice. You probably don't remember, but you raced against him as long ago as 1966. That was at Oran Park, and you had the links, and he was in an Elfin Mono. You won, he finished second. But that's sort of beyond what we normally talk about. You had that big battle with him in the Touring Car Championship at 1975 that saw him disqualified, and a year later he turns you around at Emery Park on top of the hill. You get hit by Bob Skelton's Tirana, Bo Seaton's Capri. Again, Grice gets disqualified. But in 1983, you co-drove with him at Bathurst in a Commodore. Now, how did all that come about? And how did you get on with him anyway? I mean, irrespective of past histories between the two of you, Bond and Grice in one car at Bathurst would have been a pretty good team.
Well, I think it was a great team, actually, except for one thing, that he tried this new brake fluid, which is supposed to be the be-all and end-all of brake fluid, and it's some Teflon stuff or something like that. Well, as it turned out, it was okay initially, of course, but as the race got going, we had to start pumping the brake pedal to get a pedal, and as soon as you took your foot back off the pedal again, you had to keep pumping it again. So it became quite scary in a lot of respects, because you'd be arriving at Skyline and all that sort of stuff, pumping the brake, hoping by the time you got to the fourth one, the actual brakes would stop. And so it did, but we finished third, I think, as it turned out, and we just lost a bit of time over that. But apart from that, we were looking pretty good, particularly in the beginning.
That would have been the year the car was sponsored by STP.
It was, yeah.
Red and blue car, a very, very attractive colour scheme. But of course, I assume that the product you're talking about, the brake fluid, would have been an American product.
Got no idea, because I don't think we ever used it again.
I'm almost certain after that experience, exactly.
Yeah.
You did a lot with Bathurst in a lot of good cars and a lot of good co-drivers. You only cracked it for one win, but there were other times, apart from 1974, where you thought, I should have won this one.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we should have won a lot of them, obviously, and 74 was the one I think that we're leading quite comfortably. And I thought to myself, I would just knock it off a bit and take it easy. But unbeknown to me was that the actual car at 5,000 revs, we had a bad vibration. And instead of going down the straight and doing like 5.5 or whatever it was normally, I was just sort of at 500. The next minute the fan belt jumped off. And then I'm trying to drive it around, watching the temperature gauge go up and down, and I thought, no, I'm not going to get to the finish. So by the time we stopped and put it on again,
That was all over?
It was all over. We came second. But that was only on one occasion. Other times, when we had, people, co-drivers in particular, I won't mention it, but, they had fairly weak axles, the old, not 89X, I never got that far, but the L34s. So you couldn't sort of run over the ripple strips and keep the power on, because it would, you'd finish up, you could easily break an axle, which happened a couple of times as well, So that, and then of course in 77 we let Moffat win, but that was, everyone knows about that one. So.
Yes, that's pretty much part of Bathurst history.
It is.
I mean, the scene of the pair of you driving down Conrod Straight on the last lap, just inching one against the other.
Sure.
I mean, we all know the story, but
sure.
It's probably ingrained in everybody's memory who was alive at the time.
Well, look, I think out of all the Bathurst finishes, it's probably the one that gets shown the most, And Jackie Hick said to me afterwards, he says, "Oh, you're stupid, In Europe, you just would have won the race, because how can they go quick at you, if you win the race?" Which I suppose he's right, but we thought we were doing the right thing by the team, and we're asked to come second. And, had I just gone out and won the race, and someone said, "Oh, who won that race in '77?" I was like, "Bugger if I know, I suppose Peter Brock." Because it just would have been another Bathurst, race. But anyway.
Actually, it's quite funny because there's quite a few photographs around and obviously a lot of TV footage of the team manager standing out there with the board that said form finish 1-2.
Yes.
And the next year, when Brock had won by a country mile, John Shepard again went out with a pit board that said form finish first.
Yeah, well, I didn't see that one. But, yeah, look, I think it's, Bathurst was Bathurst. We did, 28 Bathurst in all, going back to bloody billets and things, right through. So they're always good races, but a lot of the times, when we're particularly in the 3 litre class cars, there was no way you're going to win it, but you won the, your category or something like that, or the class. But nobody remembers those things, They remember who comes first. You'd say who comes second in any year. Nobody would even know half the time,
Well, that's exactly right. In the early days of Bathurst, of course, there were at least 4 classes broken up by actual purchase price of cars. And so the more expensive and the faster cars, Class D or Class E, it must have been quite challenging to run around Mount Panorama with a whole lot of tiddlers.
Yes and no. Look, I think that you just got to appreciate the fact that they're there. You can pass them, like particularly if you catch up a Datsun 1600 or a Datsun 1200 even, maybe, and you're in a Monaro, so as soon as you got around the corner, you knew you were going to overtake it, so you didn't have to dive down the inside of it and, nail the poor bugger against the wall. And look, that's the attitude that we all took. Now everyone, thinks, oh no, if you've got to be 110% or something within the fastest car, otherwise you can't make the grid. I don't know why really, because everyone's sort of got their own bit of road, and you drive accordingly, and that's the way it is.
Yeah. Things unfortunately have changed a lot. Exactly. Look, let's jump forward a little bit in time. When Group A came along, effectively announced at the end of '84, start of '85 season, that created for you another renaissance, because you arrived with an Alfa Romeo team, and you had an ex-world champion with Alan Jones with you. How did that all come about?
Well, basically, I think we drove for Alpha in the series production side of things when they started doing series production, and then Amaru Park and that had sort of a 3 litre series and what have you on, so it was quite good for that. And then as the Group A turned up, we modified the cars, and then we got one of the Luigi cars out of
Italy.
Yeah, Italy, and that was left-hand drive car, and Alan got to drive that because Alan wanted to go back to Bathurst to
Formula One.
Formula One. So we just needed a bit of training, I suppose we would say, But he was fantastic in the car, He just sort of turned the thing in knots and that. And I still think that Alan was probably the best driver that I've seen, particularly Australian driver. Not many people saw him when they was racing Formula One overseas, But I think even some of the Formula One teams he drove for, particularly Williams, rated him as the best driver that they had, So, I mean, he achieved a lot, for not having a lot of money when he went over there. He worked very hard at it and just finished up getting a Guernsey because someone broke a leg or something,
because he started off with the Surtees team, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But it was just like, as you do, a lot of people have gone over there, Vern, Chupin and so on, and that, all hoping they're going to get into Formula One. And most of them did, and most of them sort of did it to a point, but then they just either ran out of money or people came along, with rich dads from Europe or something.
Or South America.
Yeah, they bought the rides. It was one of those periods, I think, where you needed some money to go over. I remember talking to Craig Lowndes, when he was going over, and we were on the same plane, actually, and he said, he's got $1 million, to put into the team when he gets there. And we said, that sounds pretty good. He said, but when he converted to pounds, it was only 350 pounds or something or other in those days, which wasn't worth a lot when someone else turns up from, with millions of pounds of, you know what I mean,
Exactly.
and got the better drives all the time. So it didn't do him justice, I suppose, in hindsight, because I'm sure if he had stayed at it, he would have done pretty good.
Yeah. So we move into that sort of Group A era. You weren't contesting the outright. You were in the under 3 litre class, but that must have been a lot of fun because mixing it in with the middle ranging 5 litre cars.
Well, it was. I'm not sure now even, Ray, was there actually a class, like you got points for class as well as outright? I've got no idea. I remember it was in the old days, there was, sometimes people, in Alfa Romeos or whatever it was, nearly could have won the championship because it was that way. But I think we, put it this way, I think with Alan, we were sort of competitive against them on particular circuits, but again, it's a bit like the XU1s at Bathurst. The XU1 was a really good car on most tracks we went to, but at Bathurst, the Falcons just had the legs on us, and it just was hard until we finished up with the V8 in our own sort of cars.
Yeah, yeah. Staying on the subject of the Alpha just for a moment longer, when the GTVs were sort of phased out and you got a hold of the Alpha 75, the turbo car, in 86, 87, around the time of the World Championship race at Bathurst and Calder. That seemed to be a pretty good little car, but it ended up in the wall that just over the top of Skyline, didn't it?
Well, it needed a bigger turbo, basically. Like if it had the same size turbo that the Sierras would have had, it would have been a weapon, basically. And, the factory sort of overseas, we sort of went there and looked at it, and we, as I said, it handled well and did all that sort of stuff. But then Luigi, Cesario, that's right. He had a reputation of going to Bathurst and crashing. He was with Moffat once and he didn't even do one lap or something and put it in going over the top of the mountain, and then with us, of course. But look, you could take him anywhere, and he was very good in a Formula 2 car, and he'd go to practice and he was fantastic at practice. I just think the Italian bit came out, the red mist, in the races, and I sort of said to him after, I said, "Oh, Jesus, how did you crash there?" He said, "Well, I was dicing with this guy in front of me and he got away from me and I thought I'd catch him up going over Skyline." I said, that was wrong, but I suppose the only good thing, I wouldn't say good thing about it, we go down in history as being the first car to bring out a safety car at Bathurst.
As you say, sometimes history records things that you'd rather forget.
Exactly.
Oh, dear. It's funny you talk about Lucio Cesario. I can remember a really interesting story. I was actually there at the time at Lakeside one day when Alfred Costanzo was driving in an Elfin Mono, and I happened to walk past him in the dummy grid, and it was a very hot day, and he was sitting in the car, all belted up, ready to go, wearing a pair of swimming trunks and driving gloves and nothing else. No shirt, no trousers, no shoes. Can you imagine trying to do that today?
Well, no. You even get pulled in if you haven't got the gloves on or something. Oh, shit, I forgot the gloves.
Exactly. Anyway, fast forward to 1990. We've now switched to back to forward with Sierras.
Yep.
Now, that was probably one of those decisions you had no choice in because the Sierra was the car to have. What were they like?
Oh, look, they were good and bad, I suppose. They were good when the tyres were good and bad when the tyres, when they used up all the grip they had. And we used to get hounded by the little BMWs and things, as the race progressed because, But look, they were the car to have, obviously. They were, they had a nice big turbo on them, only 2 litre, of course, but, we could get easily 550 horsepower, from the motor. But what happened to us was once we sort of got over 500, we started splitting bores because we only had the standard forward block, basically. And Edinburgh had some special blocks made, which some of the cars had and we didn't have. So it was a bit unfair in that respect, I guess. because everyone else was battling. But like anyone now that's got a Sierra, my old ones and Dick's old ones and all that sort of stuff, they've all got these blocks now because, some guy bought them all up over in England and machined them all up. So anyone, the old Sierras, they finished up with these solid blocks, which were a lot more, solid than what the original Ford one was. The Ford one necked down towards the top, and that was where it was weak. But look, I think they were the car. I mean, we were sort of running Alphas, and that was with the factory. And then we sort of had Caltex as a sponsor, and we sort of said, look, we probably need one of these. So originally we just rented one, and then we built our own, of course, after that. And look, with mixed success, I guess,
You won 2 rounds of the championship in 85?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean...
85? No, that can't be right. 1990, what am I saying?
Okay. Yeah, that was sort of funny because we put back tyres on the front, all round the car, because they were big. Yeah. And we had a bit of an understeer problem with them later as the race progressed. And that seemed to fix it. So we went to Lakeside, won that race, then went across to Adelaide, I think, Mallala, we won that one. And then I started talking to Glenn and said, Glenn, try this, so Glenn tried it too. So we all finished up, so I didn't have an advantage anymore. But anyway, look, it was, they're things you did in those days because everyone would follow the Europeans, what the Europeans have been doing, and that's because they came here and they had the little wheels on the front and the bigger ones on the back and so on. But it was just a gamble we took at the time, and it worked. And I've got no idea what the current ones are using, but I'm pretty sure they'd still probably run about the same size tyres, front and back.
I don't know whether you remember it, but in 87 at the World Championship race at Bathurst, there was a funny situation took place during practice where one of Dick Johnson's mechanics happened to end up with a front wheel and tyre off one of the Eggenberger cars. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but when they tried to fit it to Dick's car, it wouldn't fit under the guard. It was an entirely different structure.
Sure.
And so we actually ran some stories about the fact that the front end of the Eggenberger cars was very different to everybody else's. But that was probably because they were they stretching the rules a little?
Oh, I think so, because they got penalised. But I think basically, it was the flares and things that they had modified so they would fit. But it was, like they would probably get away with that in Europe or whatever it was. I mean, I wasn't that impressed actually with the scrutineer that used to come out for those sort of races because it was around the World Championship. I forget his name, but after the race we had at Bathurst with Alan Jones, we came third. He reckoned that we had the bung turbo in it, see. And we said, how come? He said, look at all these measurements, they're wrong. And what we were able to do in conjunction with the turbocharged people here, we could actually sometimes you could machine a bit off the back of the wheel and it gave you a bit more top end, but you lost a bit down low. And because of this so-called expert, he didn't know how to read a drawing, like a normal factory drawing where you measure the length of the blade, but if it's a cross-section and the blade's not straight, it's going on an angle, it's not the right thing, Yeah. And the same with the diameter. The diameter of the wheel had odd number fins. So you just couldn't get a micrometer and go over it and measure it because it's short. And he said, ours is too small, it's too short, again. And when we got the whole thing back and measured it and we showed it to our scrutineers here, we finished up winning the case, But, anyone that knows anything about engineering, which you would have thought the scrutineer would have, if he's come... he was working for the FIA or whatever it was at the time, would understand what a proper drawing is, of something. But anyway.
Do you think, given the fact that the World Touring Car Championship only ran for 1 year before Bondy decided to change it to the Silhouette Touring Car Championship, and there were only 2 manufacturers involved, do you think that the idea was a good idea at the time? Should it have gone forward?
Oh, look, I'm not so sure. I mean, see, the thing was that in Australia, we were still fairly isolated. If there was a world championship, all you could do was the round that was going to be in your country. You know, there's no way we could just load into an aeroplane or whatever it is and take off and go somewhere else and run the next race and so on. Whereas if the factory cars were doing that overseas, which they do in rallies and all that type of thing, you know, so it just becomes a more expensive exercise, and it may have got away with just being too expensive for most people, you know. And the person who would have won it would have been one manufacturer that decided to go to every round, basically, you know.
Understood. Okay, moving away from that, let's talk about some just basic questions about your career. You've driven against, in open wheelers, Frank Maddich, Kevin Bartlett, Graham McRae. In touring cars, obviously Peter Brock, Alan Moffat, Dick Johnson, and a whole range of other people. Of all of those people, you obviously have certain attitudes towards them. They're either friendships, they're either respectful attitudes. As a racing driver, who do you think, you mentioned Alan Jones earlier as being the best you've seen.
Yeah.
Would he be the guy at the top of the pile?
I think so. Not many people in Australia would believe me, though, you know, because they never saw him, you know, at his peak. We happened to go overseas and see him race, you know, in the old Formula One days as well. And, you know, I can remember watching him, you know, back in the Alpha when we was going to go back to Beatrice. And John Smith and I would stand on the fence and watch him come around. You know, he was just tying the thing in knots, which was fantastic, you know. And I used to look at his time sometimes. Oh, my God, he's half a second faster. You know, and think, how you do that? So you'd have to go out and tie the thing in knots yourself if you could to try and catch it. But look, there were plenty of others that could have done the same thing. I mean, obviously, you know, Peter and was always good. You know, how can I say it? I mean, you've mentioned all the ones anyway, Dick and Moffat and so on, you know. I think anyone basically at the top level in Australia, if they did go overseas and had the money to support them, they would have done pretty good, you know. Yeah. I mean, Frank Gardner, for argument's sake, you know, he went overseas without a lot of money and that and did very well. And even before that, you know, with...
Jack went over?
No, I was even thinking touring cars. Around the bloody Holden, EH and that here.
Oh, Brian Muir. Yeah. And Hawkeye.
Yeah. All that, you know, so there were quite a few that did. And then, of course, you've got the ones after that, you know, the Jenkins and so on, you know, that went over and ran, you know, sports cars for Ferrari and what have you. You know, but probably Eddie Webber, and that was the one that sort of later on, you know, went on. You know, and Daniel sort of would look like doing pretty good, but I'm not sure where that's going to finish up, you know, at present.
Yeah. Perhaps he's reached the pinnacle of where he's going.
Well, he may have. I think he's lost, how can I say it, you know, he's getting a bit on in age. And I think after he's paid his dad back his $12 million or whatever the case may have been to get him there in the first place, you know, he's obviously done that well. It's really hard to just keep motivated, I think, And you see these young kids coming through now. I mean, it's just, I wouldn't say ridiculous, but, you know, the 90s and 20s and all this sort of stuff, winning the Formula One races and, you know, like...
The bravery level is right off the scale, isn't it?
Well, what was it? Fangio ran his first race, I think, when he was 39 or something like that.
Exactly, that's right, exactly. Yes.
So, yeah.
Oh, dear me. As far as sponsors are concerned, and obviously... you came into this game earlier than sponsorship.
Sure.
When you paid your own bills, okay. You transited across in the 68, 69 period when money came in from outside. You've had sponsors, you've had manufacturers, you've had Holden, Ford, Alfa Romeo. You've certainly had Castrol and Caltex as oil companies. You've had tyre companies. You've had pretty much all of the major sponsors. How did they help? Apart from just supplying money, was it a PR exercise? What was the thing that one of those companies did that sticks in your mind as being the most positive?
Oh, look, I think from generally, it didn't cost us much to go motor racing in the early days, particularly when you go back to the Lynx or something, you know. Because, you know, the tyres, the old Red Spot Dunlops, they'd stay on the car for a year. But, you know, you go to all the hill climbs, all the race meetings and what have you, never, you know.
Yeah.
until they got worn out, and then you put another set on. So it wasn't expensive as that, but, you know, we'd get free oil or something, you know, and you go, wow, how good is this, you know what I mean? Or you get free petrol from BP or something, you know. And so really the sponsors initially were just small sponsors, but they did help. You know, I can remember going to a hill climb I think it might have been down in bloody Victoria or something. And we needed
Templestowe or somewhere like that.
Could have been, but we needed to buy a universal joint. But I had to wait till Friday until I got paid that I could go and buy the universal joint. Then you go home and fit it to the car and everything else, then drive all night to get to Melbourne or something, you know, the next day. And we weren't the only ones doing that. You know, there was a lot of people that were sort of in the same situation. So, yeah, I don't know, it's just... I'm lost a bit there now.
No, I suppose what it comes down to is when you stepped up, when Harry picked you up and you got into the Holton dealer team in '69, okay, that would have been a different world because you weren't putting your hand in your pocket.
Sure.
Suddenly everything was provided and the team manager, the mechanics asked you, what can we do for the car? And they went away and did it. That must have been such a change.
Well, it was. I mean... See, before that, we did have Mitsubishi, you know, when I just go back a little bit there, was because we started with Mitsubishi with a little Colt Fastback, and then Mitsubishi started bringing a car out for the Southern Cross Rally every year, and they got better and better. And then we used it, you know, the next year to do rallies. But that was still in our own, I mean, we got a bit of money out of Mitsubishi, but not much, you know. But when we went to Holden, and you're in a manufacturer's point of view, and we were supposed to be paid up front something, but we just lived on prize money, really. Yeah. And Harry'd ring up and say, hey, Cock, if you want your car ready this weekend, you better get down here and work on it, sort of thing, you know. But it wasn't until much later, and I'm just trying to think, you know, it would have been 3 or 4 years before Peter and myself actually got a wage to drive.
Yeah.
It was only when Rob was talking to Bagshaw, you know, and he said, oh, now we're giving you that money. He said, what money? You know, Harry was a bit mean, I think, you know.
Frugal.
So he was keeping it. But anyway, we got the message that you're not supposed to talk to anyone high up in GM, you know, you got to go through me. But we did that, and obviously when I went across the Ford with Moffat, we got paid much more, you know. Yeah. And we still had a deal for prize money.
A silly question, but looking back on your career, do you think of yourself as a rally driver who went racing or a racing driver who also rallied? No,
I just think we filled in both, you know. I mean, see, when you think about it, with Holden, it was very important to do rallies. Because GM had a policy that they didn't support motor racing, but they sort of supported rallying. So for Harry and that, we had 3 rally cars. You know, we had sort of Fergie doing New South Wales, Tony doing Victoria, me doing the Australian ones. Initially, I was doing it in the Monaro, and then we got the XU1s, and then we actually started winning because we won the Australian 3 times. And the time I missed out, Langy, who was our second car, he ended up winning it because we broke an axle, I think, on the last rally or something, and he ended up pipping me. But and they were good things. But anyone from GM, if they came out to Harry's workshop, they would just put spotlights on the race cars and make them all look like rally cars. You know, so it kept them happy. But in hindsight, I think because we did more rallies, particularly in Holden, and in the meantime, Peter was doing a lot of series production racing. I was still doing series production racing for New South Wales and Queensland, and he was doing Victoria and South Australia. That the Touring Car Championship went from Moffat and all the others in their big, you know...
the Camaros and the Mustangs.
The Mustangs to series production sort of cars to start off with. And because Peter was already doing that, and we were sort of locked into the rally side of things. So we missed out on doing the original sort of Touring Car Championships until later on, you know.
So that changed over probably in 74?
Oh, it was. 74 was the year I think we won the championship.
Yeah.
You know, and look, you know, I think that, it's one of those sort of things you do, isn't it? I enjoyed rallying, I must admit, but I enjoyed it more later on, I think, when we had the Escorts, basically.
The Escort was your favourite rally car?
Well...
Probably the most fun to drive.
Not only that, it was identical to the cars that were winning the World Championship overseas. So if an overseas driver came out in the same sort of car, you were competitive against them, you know. And like when Harry turned up for Canberra that time, you know, and Greg still won and Harry came second because he rolled over, you know. That was Harry. And we were third, you know, and you sort of, it was really nice that because the cars were simple, you know, they weren't expensive to run and maintain.
They were sort of like a next generation Datsun 1600, weren't they, kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I mean...
They were very, very simple, very basic cars.
Yeah, they were independent suspension. They seemed to go a bit faster over the rough, I think, you know, from memory. But one good thing in those days, you know, if you had your Datsun 1600 with a really good motor and gearbox and the rest of it, and you crashed it, you went out and bought another Datsun 1600 for not much money, moved all your parts across, you know, and you're ready to go rallying the following weekend, you know. Whereas later on, of course, you know, when we had to go, I think the biggest problem with rallying in those days, when we went to Group A, and you had to then run standard sort of cars and had to you couldn't modify any of the suspensions and so on, you know. So if you ran a Porsche or something, you had to buy all the Porsche bits and so on. So it became quite an expensive exercise, and you just couldn't go and buy another car if you crashed it, you know, and go again. But I mean, it's been up and down. But I used to like rallying because I felt that if you did try really hard rallying, you actually went faster, you know, where sometimes in racing that's not the case, you know, you can overdrive and go slow. So racing, I always found that you needed to be a bit like a robot, you know, that you did exactly the same things all the time. If you had to look after your tyres to make sure you had tyres at the end of the race, you did so, you know, and you wouldn't rush off in the beginning and try and get a lap ahead or something, you know. But, yeah, it was... I still enjoyed both, you know, and sometimes, well, if you had to do one, what would you do? And I said, I think I'd do the racing because you only went out and raced on the afternoon and went home at night, you know, when you've been broken down in the middle of the forest somewhere, you know, it's raining and cold and, you know, and you had to wait for someone to come and get you, you know, the next day or something or other, you know, you think, you know, what are we doing out here? Like,
yes,
unless someone was shooting at you, you wouldn't be doing this sort of stuff, you know.
What we used to refer to it as going out to photograph rally cars on the intersection of two dirt roads in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, look, you know.
The two major events in the time you were running the rally team, the Escort rally team, the Ford team, were the Southern Cross Rally and the Canberra Rally.
Sure.
They were the two major international events. Yep. Now, you brought out at least two of the
world champions.
Bjorn
Waldegaard.
Waldegaard and, of course, Ari Vatanen. You must have had just so much fun in that time frame because you had the best cars, you had the fastest cars, you were up against basically the works Nissan team, the Datsun team. Tell us about that time and the people involved.
Sure. Look, it was one of the times I really enjoyed, I guess, because originally we met Ari and David, you know, when they came out to the Castrol Rally in Canberra. And obviously Ari's got a very good reputation, you know, of crashing. But he's very fast.
Oh, yes.
And I still think that when Mikkola, you know, he always tells the story like the very first time he rallied in Finland and all he had was this old Opel Ascona, you know. Anyway, Hannu and Mikkola turned up in a factory, you know, Ford. And of course, they were first car on the road, you know, and halfway through the event, you know, they've turned over to the guy, you know, the control, and said, "Oh, who's coming second?" And they looked up and said, "You are." And Ari won the event. Well, see, Ari, you know, his car wouldn't have been anywhere near as good, but he's from, I mean, they're both from Finland, but, you know, he sort of thought, "I've made it," you know. And he sat by the phone and all this, but nothing happened for quite some time, you know, until one guy rang him from England or something and said, "You want to come over to England and bring your old Ascona and I'll navigate, da-da-da." And it's sort of history now because, you know, he sort of got there and and did really good. Like like you hear great results, from and like when he went to New Zealand or something, the Fiat's or a race against something, and he's in the bloody escort, and anyway, he'd get in the lead, then crash, and they start again the next day, and get behind and pass them all again, and get into the lead and crash. It was sort of one of those things. But anyway, that was just Ari. So
you could never doubt the fact that he was at 11 tenths the whole time, wasn't he?
Well, that's right. Well, see, anyhow, the first time we competed against him, we're down in Canberra, and he was driving a Massport car, which was, New Zealand-based car. It's still the same as all of ours. They're all VA escorts and that. And anyhow, the first few stages were on bitumen that we had, which was going to be a
the housing estate. Lucy Gullet Drive, it was called. I remember that.
I don't remember that, but anyway. But anyhow, as it turned out, after all the stages we did there, I think I was leading the event, And it wasn't until later on that he looked at the footage and he said, "Oh, you had much more grip than I did." I said, "Of course we did." I said, we had better tyres, that was all. He was using the old Dunlop A1s or A2s, whatever they called, and we had some Bridgestones that we sort of... Anyhow, so... And then it went into off the road and everything else. Well, he got into the lead, only just from Greg. Greg was really competitive down there. So, and that was the way the event went. And then he rolled on a corner. He came around the road. The sill just dug in and just rolled over. And he lost probably a minute or two because, and he gets into that stage, and all the press are there and what happened there? We rolled, and if you people didn't stop taking photos and push me back on the wheels, I'd still be winning, sort of thing, But then, of course, I should not have rolled over. That was just his attitude. And so after the event, like Greg won by 40 seconds or something, and Ari and then me. And David Richard was there with his wife and little baby. And they came back and stayed at our place, in Sydney, and we became quite friendly with Dave, after that. So that when we go over, obviously, to England, we'd stay with them and so on. Anyhow, because we had the escort team and that when the Southern Cross Rallies turned up, we thought whoever the world champion was, and Bjorn Waldegard and Hansel Celius were world champions one particular year. I forget what year now, but it was one of the years we had the escorts. So they came out and drove the Southern Cross Rally. And our boys thought Bjorn was fantastic. He was very competitive, easy to get on with, right-hand drive car, didn't matter, So anyhow, but he broke an axle one stage, and we've got a different diff they ran overseas. But you could still drive our car on one axle because we had a Detroit locker in the back anyhow. And he got to the end and he was most impressed. He said, we would be stuck, if we only had a limited slip diff. So we put a new back end in it and all that sort of stuff. And after the very first stage next day, he said, "Oh, Colin, this rally could end very soon for me. I'm driving very fast."
Yes.
But, and it was terrific anyway. And of course the following year, Ari was world champion and David, so we got them to come out. And, it sort of, when Ari sort of turns up at the workshop, he said, "Oh, if you want me to drive 10 tenths, I must have a left-hand drive car." Yeah, no problems, because all the bits were available for it, so we'd made the left-hand drive car. And then he sits in the car and he said, "Oh, I'd like my seat a bit higher because I like to see over the bonnet a bit more." Yeah, no problems, so we could do that. And then, David said, "Look, I want my seat moved further back and more towards the centre of the car and as low as possible." And I'm thinking, God, no wonder they're world champion. He's trying to offset the fact that Ari's up there and rear-wheel drive, more traction on the back wheels and everything else. But when I finally got around to ask him why he wants to be back there, he says, "I just want to be as far away from the accident that we're probably going to have."
Exactly.
I said, "Ari, how many roll have you had this year?" He said, "Oh, I'm not sure, maybe 10. So he said, "How many have you had, Colin?" I said, "None." And he said, "Well, how do you know where the limit is?" And I said, "Well, that I couldn't answer. There was no way we could just write off 10 motor cars, like we just didn't have the budgets for it." But, you know, and I mean, Ari was terrific, but he'd come into control and there'd be a bloody front wheel missing off it or something like that, the mud go. But that was just how he was, and they sort of always, in Europe in particular, they seemed to not worry, as long as you were leading when you crashed, you know, you were having a go. And then David always used to tell the story about when Ford pulled the pin and he still had the Rothmans money. And he got David Sutton to build a couple of cars, you know, for him and Hannu. So, which they did, and they were doing an event in England. And they went out and were surveying the road, but they had this fast sweeper, but they didn't realise there was a change of surface halfway around the corner. And it had been raining, and Hannu was the first car on the road. So Hannu has arrived at this particular spot. And the first part was okay, the second part was really slippery, and he just slipped off the road and just went boom, 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 down maybe 100 feet or something, back on its wheels. And he gets out of the car and he says, he's never going, quick, get out of the car. He says, why? He said, Ari's the next car. See, so they get out, well, Ari arrives, loops it, goes off the road backwards, and goes boom, 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 boom. Unbeknown to Ari, of course, that he had finished on top of Hannu's car.
Exactly, yeah, roof to roof. Yes, I've seen the pictures.
Wheels to wheel.
Wheels.
I don't know. He says, oh, David, this is a big crash. As his voice, I can see my bonnet in the rear vision mirror. But it was the bonnet, of course, for the other car. But it was, you know, and I think, you know, we've still stayed friends with David. I mean, David's, you know, from the Super Rally team and all that sort of stuff and what have you. And,
a real professional.
Oh, well, what he did there, you know, like I remember once we were over in England with him. You know, he's got their own helicopter and things. You go everywhere by helicopter. It's unbelievable. Golf, that's not. Anyhow, he said, oh, I just had the best meeting, you know, with British Tobacco. He said, I've got an open checkbook, but we've got to win the championship this year. This is with the triple, you know, 5 Super. Anyway, I got on the plane. I said, Jesus, I'd hate to have that much pressure on me, you know, because there's Toyota there, there's Mitsubishi there. It wasn't just though they're the only ones, you know. But that year, they won the championship with Colin McRae.
Yeah.
And it just went boom. I mean, if it had gone, it probably could have, you know, gone the other way, because after that, I mean, he had the BAR Formula One team for a while and all that sort of stuff as things, you know, and he's done a lot of work for other manufacturers over there. And, you know, he was chairman of Aston Martin not that long ago, I think, but he's just, you know, he's one of these goers, I think. You know.
The man for all seasons.
Well, he's probably one of the most influential people in motorsport in England, out of England, you know, because he's been there and done that, you know, and I think now they do the Paris-Dakar thing with the king of Bahrain. They build those red Bahrain things. That's you know, the pro drive sort of thing. But yeah, that's just the way it is, you know. And he's 10 years younger than me, so he's
Doesn't that make you feel miserable?
No, so he must be 70. I don't know. Gosh.
One question, and just from memory, I can't remember you ever having a major crash.
Well, do you call the one at Bathurst major or not? You know, when we 3 laps into the race, this is nearly 50 years ago now,
72.
in the XU1.
Oh well, that was that. You just slipped and tripped over. That wasn't a major crash.
No, not so much. It's just that it had been raining, obviously, you know, and gone back the other stuff. And Harry, we only had one set of wets and one set of intermediates, you know. And Harry said to me, "What ones do you want?" I said, "I have the wets, you know." Anyway, when they push the cars out onto the grid in those days, and then you go and have a leak, and you come back and you get in the car and you look and you go, Jesus, Harry, you know, Brocky had the bloody wets and I've got the intermediates. And Harry said, oh, don't worry, cock, this rain won't last. Well, he was right, but neither did I, you know. And it was just on the 3rd lap, and it was just going across the top of the mountain, just understeering a bit, no dramas. And it wasn't until I was about 10 foot from the fence that I realised it looked like I might have hit it, you know. So we've hit it and gone up on 2 wheels for a while, and I've seen those, French drivers driving 2 wheels.
The hell drivers.
No dramas here. And then it went onto its roof, and all you could do, looking out the windscreen, you could see the road rushing past, and you got your foot on the brake as hard as you can.
Right about now, you think I've lost control of this.
Well, it's not really. Well, it is slowing down, but it's just from the grating of the road. Anyway, and then it went to the inside and did another pike, 1.5, I think, and finished back on its wheels. And I just got out and had a look at it, and it wasn't all that bad. The front mudguard was a bit damaged, and I think the radiator was broken. And I was in the, there was no way I could get out where it was because it was just off the road. And I go back to the boys and they said, well, you saw what happened, it was on TV, but it's not that bad, Except after the race, the guy who came along to tow it back was, I'm just thinking the name of the tow truck, which is great photos of it. Anyway, he put a chain through the roof.
Yeah, through the windows.
Yes. And picked the thing up, the roof's like this and it's like that, and you go. And then he's crashed into the back of the car as it's swinging off this thing all the way back to the pits. Well, when it got back to the pits, it was absolutely a write-off, And I'm trying to tell the boys it wasn't that bad when I left it, anyway. But look, that was nearly 50 years ago. I don't think rallying we ever finished on our roof or anything like that. We had a few bouncing off trees and things, but that was just normal.
I can remember you saying one night, it must have been one of the very early rallies in the Monaro, and we were talking at a dinner stop at 3 o'clock in the morning kind of thing, and you told me that you'd gone head first off the road at one point, just over the crest of a hill, and the car had understeered straight off into a whole sort of row of saplings. And you said, you know what? They fell over.
No, well, see, normally what would happen in the the difference between, a Mitsubishi Colt Fastback, it was only a very small light car, so if you ran into the trees or something, you had to get reversed and reverse out, But with the Monaro, it was such a strong car, You just put it in first and drove over the trees and got back onto the road. I mean, it was sort of I actually used to like the Monaro. It was plenty of power. You do power slides everywhere and things, but it did get a lot of flat tyres, being just a bit heavier. And what's amazing, and that's what people don't realise, you're a bit inclined to get more flat tyres in wet roads than you do in dry, because when you're cutting rubber, you sometimes use wet, a knife, and it'll cut it easier, because when it's dry, it sort of bounces off a bit, on the rocks and so on. So we finished up, or either sometimes you get bogged, and then you go over to the fence and you start winching it, and you found that the fence was coming towards you instead of you getting out of the bog,
Oh, dear me. Oh, gosh. So we're now in the 21st century. It's 2021. 2022, what am I saying?
Yeah.
What do you watch on TV now?
Oh, look.
Or do you watch it all?
No, I don't watch it all, Ray, but I still watch Formula One, but it's not as exciting as it used to be.
First 10 laps are okay.
Well, yeah, although and then the bikes I used to really like, because I think, they don't get paid enough, I think, but look, we still go to the V8s, and I still watch the V8s, of course, I mean, with the driving standards of, 10 years or something doing that, so. And I try and give Charlie a bit of a hand, Team 18, only with his PR stuff and things now. But, because they travel all over the countryside, and it's not as easy just to follow, or go to everyone. I mean, I can, but I just sort of think you may as well stay home watching on TV, because if you do go, we went to Winton for the last one and things, and then you finish up just sitting down and watching it on TV,
In the back of the pits.
Yeah, exactly. You can go and at least you can go and talk to the boys after and think. But look, and see what went wrong or what went right, I don't sort of see much on rallying anymore. Like, we went down a year or so ago now, I think it might have been, to Bega and did, the Bega Valley Rally just as, as a person there and
spectators.
Spectators. And it was good. I mean, I used to like that area. It was probably the best roads we had, I think, down in Bega. They were just...
very fast roads.
Well, they were just well packed as well.
Yeah.
Especially the Shire roads. The Shire roads were absolutely, great. It was sort of funny with rallying because the further south you went, the more sandier it sort of got, like in Victoria. And the further north you went, the dustier it got, basically, So Bega was just a nice thing in the middle there where it wasn't too dusty, But the roads were great. And I remember having a really good ding-dong with George Fury on the stage, And anyway...
That would have been Escort versus Datsun.
Yeah. And we were first car on the road, and we had one last stage to go, and there wasn't much in it, And it was about a 100k stage, and it was a stage that I knew fairly well because we used to go down and do a bit of practice in those days of course you could. And I just said to DD, tighten your seatbelt.
We're going to have a go now.
Have a go. Anyhow, and off we went, and it was a really good drive. You know yourself sometimes when it's really, and it's all going well. We sort of clubbed a bank at one side and everything else. That was okay. Anyway, we get to the end of the stage. And in those days, you presume that he's 2 minutes behind you. So you wait your 2 minutes. Nothing's happened. But then we had to go, because you had to book in on time and so on. And as it turned out, George broke down after about the first 10k or something. So I said, that whole 90k of extra that we were doing was, well, not necessarily for nothing, but but it was.
Well, you're in the zone, and it feels when you're in the zone, it feels fantastic.
It does, yeah.
It just does.
It does, and particularly when you know the road a bit as well. Like it sort of. Don't forget, we never really had pace notes. The pace notes came in after us. Originally, we were working off maps, and that became
Army survey maps.
Absolutely,
that were written, that were drawn in 1942.
No, but you had all these little bits of road which they remodified. You had to go around the old bit because that was a bit shown on the map. But you also got shot at, because you finish in someone's backyard in the middle of the forest. And you think, oh, God, this is not the right road, So you turn around next to it, just bang, bang. Oh, my God. So I think in hindsight too, they virtually then, we went pace noting, which was, where you just had all the information you wanted. So you stayed on the right road, you didn't get lost. But nowhere near as much as what the guys do now, of course, with every corner and every bit of road they're calling down to the driver, which is fine unless he turns 2 pages or something like that. But the good guys don't do that. Look, it was
buckets of fun.
A lot of fun. I mean, and a lot of stories that come out. I mean, one of the funniest stories was John Bryson and Barry Lloyd were in a Colt, in the old days, going back in Colt fastbacks. And he'd broken the windscreen. We didn't have laminated windscreens. So anyway, early morning, and they're driving down this road, and they've caught this old farmer in his ute. Anyhow, he was just going down this road. He probably goes down this road every Sunday morning at this time of morning, going somewhere. Well, the dust, they couldn't, flash their lights or anything. So Bryson said, get up close to the back of him, which Barry did. And Bryce undoes his belt, out through the windscreen, jumps into the back of the ute. He's got his crash helmet on. He gets around and says, excuse me, mate, do you mind pulling over and letting us pass? Well, the guy must have thought a Martian just turned out of somewhere or something.
Yes, rallying in those days was a little more agricultural.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, I know. But then, we did a lot of overseas as well because we went to New Guinea, for God's sake, and rallied there. And you go, what was it like rallying in New Guinea? I said, well, there's still bomb holes all over the place, so you can fall into a bomb hole. And they have this called kunai grass, which is about 6 feet tall. And all you've got is this little track that you can see where the wheels are. And as you run over this stuff, it stands back up again behind you. You don't fall over. Anyway, and we'd have stupid instructions that were miles out, like maybe a kilometre out. And, I hope you'd be calling and you said, oh, look, we come out on a football field, left on the football field, and we're going along, and Miles is gone. And he said, "You don't think we're on the football field and haven't cut the grass for a while or something?" But sure enough, about a K down the road or something, you pop out onto the football field and stuff. You go, and they were interesting because in New Guinea you either get a river you can't get across or a mountain range you can't get over. So you all get there and you have to wait for everyone to turn up and then turn around and go back again, and all this sort of stuff. And we, had some overseas drivers there with us as well, but. In the Philippines, when Marcos was still there, my God, you get off the plane and everyone's got guns. This is when it was, could go back that way at present, I suppose, with a young son, maybe. But anyway, look, and they were different. But, and New Guinea, New Zealand was a bit of fun,
Some of the drop-offs on New Zealand, some of the roads, where you had a sort of solid wall on one side of the car, and space on the other, and they didn't have fences.
Well, they didn't have trees either. I don't think that was different. Like in Australia, we never went far off the road because you was usually a tree that might stop or something.
Exactly.
But bloody in New Zealand, we speared off the road once there, and we hit the bank on the inside, and it just threw us. And we'd gone straight into the darkness and stopped. But we hadn't gone far at all. The road was there, but we had to winch ourselves back up the fence line and everything else. But another time in the same event, Jimmy Richards, we were in the snow and we saw this hole in the snow. And we went left and everything around the corner. And we looked down there, you could see these lights, down there. So we stopped and George fell over, of course, because it was ice. And we yelled out, to Jimmy, "Okay?" He said, yeah, we're okay, but there's no way they're going to get out of where they were, And at one stage, they thought they might just roll the car back on its wheels, so that the oil doesn't run out of the motor and everything else. But they didn't. But in the next morning when they looked at it, they were very close to another drop, which would have gone down, many, many feet. It would have been one. They said, "Let's just roll it over so we then." Where's the car gone?
The disappearing car, exactly.
I guess there's more stories.
There's so many. There are so many. Exactly. Do you remember the book that Barry Lloyd wrote back from the time when
you can't get there?
You can't get there. You can't get to there from here. That's right. The title of the book. That's right. Exactly. Basically about navigation.
No, it was just when they were doing the little Colt fastbacks. What actually happened, this ended up being our rally cars, but they sent two of these little Colt fastbacks to Australia just to do some testing, right? And they're only like 850cc funny fastback thing, Anyhow, they decided they're going to drive them around Australia just to see, and Doug Stewart was in there and Barry Lloyd and all that anyway. And Doug was going across the Harbour Bridge or something. They just left, the travel lodge and going across. And they had to pay to go across the bridge. And he pushed back on the seat to get some money and he broke the
seat.
The seat. Oh, God.
On day one.
Well, we were only on about a couple of K. So they went back and welded the seat back up again. Off they went.
Start again.
But what they sort of did, they were driving down some of the fence lines.
Yeah.
Out the back, and that's when people said to them, "Where have you come from?" We said, "Oh, we've come from,
wherever."
To here. Well, you can't get to there from here. Well, you can if you go down the fence lines and all that sort of stuff. And it was really funny. They had one Japanese guy with them on this particular road, and he was supposed to fly back to Japan, and they were somewhere up in Northern Territory. Anyway, they missed the flight. Because they were late getting there, and the bloody plane crashed or something. You know what I mean?
Gosh!
And you say, lucky. There's sometimes.
Sometimes you can somebody's looking after you.
But look, anyway, and that's where that sort of story came from, basically, because they just found these little cars. You couldn't break them. They were not really quick, but they were just sort of unbreakable in there.
Yeah. In 1994. Going to that particular point in time, you drove one of the Commodores with Anders Olsson for Freddie Gibson's Winfield team. At one stage of the game, leading the race looking very, very good. It didn't end up that way, but was that your last ever motor race? Because from our sort of statistics, we think it is, or was.
Yeah, it would be, Ray, except for the occasional ones when you drove some of your old cars, like at historic meetings or something like that. And they used to say they have a race, and in the end they say, no, I don't want to race one of these anymore, because even though one of my old cars, you're never quite sure how well they've been prepared, you know. And we made it all this way through
without
no
any
broken
injuries.
Anyway, look,
you don't have a Lola limp.
No. It was different because it was the first time I'd driven a car which did have a bit of aero attached to it, you know. And you could drive them a bit differently by actually sort of braking into the apex of the corners and then getting on the power and going again. Whereas prior to that, you know, you did all your braking basically in a straight line, then you sort of turned in and with the throttle you sort of organised where you were, and, you know, you got on the throttle as soon as possible and away you went. So that took a little bit of learning. We went to Phillip Island, you know, prior to Bathurst, and had to drive around there, so it was good. But at the race itself, we had a problem early in the piece. I'm not sure what went wrong now, and we sort of dropped back a lap. But it was one of those events where it was raining and stopping and thingo. So if you had the right tyres on at the right time, you did good, you know, and we were able to get it back on the lead lap and then back into the lead. But then obviously something would have happened that would have dried out, we would have stopped and we drove back. But at the end of the day, it was typical, which is happening today in V8s in particular. You sort of have a safety car quite close to the end of the race, and everyone bunches up. And we were sixth, and then you just drove around and finished sixth, if you know what I mean, because everyone... and I think it was good. I think it was nice that we sort of finished the race without any problems, really. But, it was about time. You know, I've been doing it now for 30-odd years professionally. I must have been well into the 50s, I think, you know.
Yeah.
Look, it was the last time we drove that type of car, you know. I think later on we occasionally drove one of John Dawson Damer's Formula One cars at historic meetings and things like that. And I think I still might hold the record at Eastern Creek in the Lotus 49 or something or other, you know. And of course Smithy drove it after me, you know, and I used to say, Smithy, you're never going to beat my record. I was 50 when I did that. You're much older than that. But look, you know, I mean, well, John's cars were great cars, you know. He had 7 Formula One Lotuses and things. But
going back to that race in the Commodore, I can remember that year. I'm sure it was that year. Scaife won, I think, the first 4 races, and after the 3rd or the 4th race, Cam stepped in and suggested to Freddie that he should remove what he referred to as the rear wheel sensors off the Commodore, and they didn't win another race for the rest of the year. They were, Fred called them rear wheel sensors. Effectively, it was traction control.
Oh, yeah.
And the car, I can remember the car coming out of the last corner at Symonds Plains with 2 wheels in the air, the 2 inside wheels in the air, and squatted down and still accelerating out of the corner. Not easy to do without traction control.
Oh, he wouldn't have been the first one to try traction control, because I think there's some of that around when the Sierras were in their heyday. But
remember what Freddie Gibson was asked after with the Godzillas? He was asked whether there was a boost control on the car. This was several years later, and the journalist who asked him said, "We always thought it was in the cigarette at the ashtray."
Oh, okay.
And Fred said, "No, it wasn't in the ashtray, it was the ashtray."
Oh, okay. No, I just... well, I think there were some clever people around in those days, weren't there? But, you know, like that's all gone now by the wayside, you know. I mean, even Walkinshaw, you know, you go back and in history for him, you know, particularly in England, you know, the things that they used to have to do, you know, when they were running...
2 fuel tanks.
Oh, well, I know that when they were running the Rovers, it might have been, they had a big fuel tank, and on the slow down lap, the drivers had to blow into this bit of thing and fill up, in the fuel tank itself, a balloon, basically. So if they did want to check, how much fuel was in the car, it turned out okay. But, anyhow.
Stories for another day.
Absolutely, yeah.
One last question, because this has been just so much fun. What was the best piece of advice you were given about motor racing by whoever?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose the only advice we were ever given was if
Stay on the black stuff?
No, not so much that. If you're going to buy a car, make sure you buy it after the race, after it leaves the track, and don't let it go home or something. Because in those days there were quite a few people that would sort of go back and then do a bit of an engine change or a bit of a whatever. So, and that's what happened to me when Bob Holden, we bought the car from Bob. He broke a back axle and the back wheel fell off. So we still loaded on the trailer and everything else, took it home, put it in the garage, and I jacked it up, anyway, my dad come down to have a look at it, he kicked the wheel and it just fell off. A bit fragile, isn't it, son? But anyway, I don't know, I just think that concentration's the biggest thing that you've got to have. You just got to concentrate the whole time on the job and don't let yourself wander, because I remember at Surfers Paradise, there was one of the 12-hour races when we were going around the Monaro. It would have been probably 1970 actually, and we were leading thing fairly well, and Tony was still our co-driver and that, and there was a little plane landing in the airstrip in the middle of the road.
Yep.
And I started looking at the bloody airstrip, the airplane landing, and next minute you're going down the back straight and you think, oh shit,
there's a left-hander at the end of the back straight.
There's a left-hander and a big drain and all the rest of it, you could have easily disappeared. So you start thinking, no, you just keep concentrating on it. And I honestly think that's a lot. It's even when people are driving on the road, if they do concentrate on what they're actually doing and not looking what's happening around them sometimes, you could avoid a lot of accidents and things happening,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Look, Colin, I've just thoroughly enjoyed this afternoon. Absolutely enjoyed it immensely. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you so much for your reminiscence. Thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful.
That's okay, Ray. Yeah, no problems.
Well, friends, that's the conclusion of another episode of the Australian Muscle Car Magazine podcast series. We hope you enjoyed the tales contained herein and look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, be sure to check out musclecarmag.com.au for news stories, news and galleries from the Muscle Car Vault. We add them weekly, as well as brand new digital issues as soon as they become available on the newsstand. Thanks for listening, and as always, safe driving and happy reading from the team at Australian Muscle Car Magazine.